introduction. And thank you for all of those who have taken time to join the webinar today. As Mr. Matsuo said, today's topic is pipeline drug opportunity assessments, and we'll be looking together at the why, the when, and the how of conducting successful projects of this type in different countries around the world. So as Mr. Matsuo said, my name is Tim, T-I-M. I'm the Executive Director here in the Informa Pharma Custom Intelligence team, and it's a pleasure to speak with you all. We'll aim for around 30 to 40 minutes of presentation today. And then as Mr. Matsuo said, there'll be some time for questions and answers towards the end of the session. So if you have anything that you would like to ask, as Mr. Matsuo said, we'll take some questions and have some time for discussion at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. So most of you will be familiar, I believe, with Informa, but for those of you who are not, just a quick introduction to Informa, which is the company, of course, that I work for. So Informa is a publicly traded company. It's a member of the FTSE 100, so one of the 100 largest companies on the London Stock Exchange. We operate in 5 different divisions, as you see in the middle of this slide. In the Informa Intelligence division is the division to which I belong, and the Informa Intelligence division serves 4 different industries: pharma, finance, transportation, and infrastructure. And I, of course, work exclusively in the pharma space. So, again, for those of you who are familiar with Informa Pharma, my apologies. For those of you who are not, just a brief introduction to the work that we do. So the aim of Informa Pharma is to support decision-making across the product lifecycle for investors and, of course, for the pharma industry. And you can see in this pyramid some of the services that are offered by Informa Pharma. So you can see a number of news and insight sources, what we call our insight and analysis products, such as Pink Sheet, In Vivo, MedTech Insight, Script, and so forth. In the middle of the pyramid, you can see the Informa Pharma Intelligence products, and these are the database and report and analysis products that many of you will be familiar with, such as the Sightline family of products, Trial Trove, Pharma Projects, and so forth, Data Monitor Healthcare, Med Device Tracker, and other databases that you may be familiar with. And at the top of the pyramid is what we call the Custom Intelligence team. So Custom Intelligence is a rather strange name and a little bit difficult to understand, but Custom Intelligence is basically the consulting team at Informa Pharma. So all of the other parts of the pyramid, these are what we call syndicated products. So this simply means that the product is the same whichever client buys the product. So the client buys a subscription to a database, to a report product, to a news product or similar product. And the content of that product is the same, of course, for every client. Consulting, of course, is very different. What we do is bespoke. That means it's one-to-one for individual clients. So if you have a particular consulting need, a particular business issue, a particular problem that you're looking to solve, then the consulting team that I work in at Informa Pharma is the team that can help you. And of course, we have a great advantage working in consulting at Informa Pharma because it means that we can access all of the other Informa Pharma data sources, be they databases, news sources, reports, forecasts, and so forth. And they help us a great deal in the work that we do, including in opportunity assessments, which will be the main topic for today. So I'm going to move on quickly. Again, just a quick introduction to the Informa Pharma Custom Intelligence team, so the Informa Pharma consulting team. So as the slide shows here, we do work very widely across the world with clients in the US, Europe, China, and Japan. We work with a large number of multinational clients, but also with emerging biotechs, medium-sized companies, medical device companies, all types and sizes of companies within pharmaceuticals and medical technology. And we do also do work with government agencies. So you can see examples in the center of the screen, the European Commission, which is the executive arm of the European Union here in Europe, or AMED in Japan. Let me just give you one more slide concerning the Informa Pharma Custom Intelligence offerings, and then we'll move into our main topic, which is looking at opportunity assessments in various global markets. So this slide just summarizes some of the offerings, the product and project offerings that we have in the Informa Pharma consulting team. This is just a selection of the products and services that we offer. These are some of the more frequently offered projects that we conduct, but of course we do conduct other types of projects aside from what you see here on this slide. So on the left of the slide, you'll see this term strategic altitude, which again is perhaps a little difficult to understand, but this simply means that the projects that we provide can sometimes be looking across the whole of the industry, or they may be looking at a corporate or company level or across a portfolio of products, or they may be looking at the individual product level. And generally speaking, the opportunity assessments that we conduct fall into that category of product level projects. So you can see on the right of the slide some examples of our offerings. So at the industry level, there are projects that we conduct that look at the market landscape across the industry. That might be, for example, in investment and deal trends, in clinical trial trends, regulatory trends, and so forth. It may be looking at impact assessments for trends and issues that will impact and affect the whole of the industry. So this could be policy or regulatory changes. This could be the impact of M&A on innovation in the pharma industry. It could be the impact of stakeholder behavior in this same area. In the middle of the slide, in this pink color, you can see some of the projects that we do at the portfolio or corporate, so company level. That might be in portfolio optimization, looking to prioritize different indications or different products within the same portfolio to help with resource allocation and other issues. We may be helping with partnering strategy through deal analysis, through partner identification, or through partner canvassing, which simply means contacting partners or potential partners to assess their interest in potential partnering or deal making. Or it could be in market positioning, looking at competitor strategy assessment, value model identification, and so forth. And finally, at the bottom of this slide in the orange type color, you can see some examples of the product level projects that we sometimes conduct. Clinical trial planning, benchmarking of clinical trials, looking at different endpoint designs, estimating success rates within clinical trials, forecasting and valuations, epidemiology or sales-based forecasting, as well as NPV modeling. And finally, towards the left-hand side, you can see the opportunity assessments. So opportunity assessments are where we seek to help our clients to understand the value of a pipeline product that they are developing. So while the product is still being developed, of course, it's important to consider whether this product will have a commercial value once it is launched on the market. This can be done in a variety of ways. This may involve TPP testing, primary research, secondary research. We can also look at pricing strategy and related areas as part of these projects. And of course, today we're going to focus on the topic of opportunity assessments and how to conduct these projects successfully in global markets. So that was the brief introduction to Informa and to the Informa Pharma Custom Intelligence, so the Informa Pharma consulting team. And now let's move into the main topic for today, which is to look in a little bit more detail at opportunity assessments. Just before we do that, I'm going to mention once more one of the previous slides. So on this slide, you'll see towards the bottom of the slide, towards the bottom of the pyramid, there is a red or pink part in the insight and analysis part of the pyramid, which says in vivo. Now, in vivo is one of the excellent news and analysis sources that are available from our colleagues at Informa Pharma. And in vivo really attempts not to bring you the day-to-day news, so not the things that happened today or yesterday, but in vivo looks at some of the deeper trends and ongoing issues and themes that affect the pharmaceutical industry. It's an excellent thing to read. I always find it very helpful in my work. I've certainly been reading it for a number of years, and I know very well some of the people who work on in vivo and who create the stories and articles for that publication. Originally, of course, this was a magazine. You could have a hard copy of it. I personally rather like hard copies, but I'm afraid there are no more hard copies available. So, of course, this is now available through the internet as a digital, you could say a digital magazine or digital source of insight and analysis. So the presentation that I'll be sharing with you today is based in part on a recent article by my colleague Amanda Miklas that was published recently in Vivo that looks at some of the critical success factors when conducting opportunity assessments in the pharmaceutical industry. So if you have not read In Vivo before, I very much recommend it to you. If your company has access, then I suggest you take a look. If you do not have access, then please feel free to contact your sales account manager, and I'm sure they'll be able to either arrange access or even perhaps a complimentary, a free trial at the start so that you can become familiar with some of the contents. And today's presentation, as I say, is based in part on that article. I've made, of course, quite a lot of changes. I didn't want to simply present the contents of the article to you. So if you have happened to have read the article, you'll notice that the contents today are in fact somewhat different. So let's go into the main content for today. So as I said, we'll be covering pipeline drug opportunity assessments. And the first question here is why? So why conduct a pipeline drug opportunity assessment? Well, what is the purpose of this type of project? And you can see this slide as perhaps sharing some of the potential definitions of pipeline drug opportunity assessments. So here we give you 3 conceptual reasons to conduct pipeline drug opportunity assessments. So the situation would be that you have a drug in either preclinical or clinical development, and you need to assess the future marketability, the likelihood of the chance of commercial success for that pipeline drug. So why would you want to do this? Well, of course, doing this type of project can help you to understand the potential clinical and commercial differentiation for the product, as well as the future competitive landscape and the market dynamics that you are likely to see when your product is launched onto the market. Of course, if your product is still in development, particularly in an earlier stage of development, then the market dynamics and the competitive landscape when you reach the future market, maybe in 5 years' time or even 10 years' time, could be quite different. So it's important to look forward to understand not just the market today, but also the future competitive landscape for your product should it be launched into a particular disease market. This will help you to answer key questions, such as will your pipeline drug address unmet need? Where will it fit in the treatment paradigm? And what is the likely uptake for the drug? In other words, how likely is the drug to be prescribed, to be used by physicians and by patients? And finally, perhaps more conceptually, the pipeline drug opportunity assessments effectively allow you to connect a pipeline drug or an idea or a hypothesis with the marketplace to allow for better planning. So this means that while you are still in the pipeline stage of development for your drug, and it may even really only be something like an idea or a hypothesis. For example, you may have an early preclinical asset where you have identified a particular mechanism of action or a particular molecular target, and you want to know if a drug based on this mechanism or this molecular target may have a chance to be successful in the marketplace. When the drug is quite early in development, when it's still a pipeline drug, it's often difficult to think systematically and to think objectively about the prospects for success for that product in the market. So pipeline drug opportunity assessments will allow you to connect that pipeline drug, or maybe even just an idea or a hypothesis related to the positioning or the target indication or the molecular target or the mechanism of action for a drug. It will allow you to connect that to the marketplace to allow you to conduct better planning as you develop your product. So those are 3 conceptual reasons why pipeline drug opportunity assessments are a good idea to conduct. And I'll give you 3 slightly more practical reasons for why you may want to conduct such projects. So we all live in a competitive environment, and in a pharmaceutical company, of course, you may be competing with other departments, with other development programs for the budget to continue development of your product. And of course, the more evidence that you have that your drug will be a success, will have a commercial opportunity that is attractive in the marketplace, then the higher the likelihood that you will be able to obtain budget to continue development. So this is a very practical reason to conduct this type of project. This can also help to prioritize a pipeline drug for further development. So of course, most companies will have a number of different pipeline drugs in development, and this type of project may help you to differentiate between those products to see which is the most attractive for future development. So if you're in a role that looks at overall pipeline portfolio or pipeline strategy, these types of projects, when conducted for a number of different pipeline drugs, can help you to prioritize between the attractiveness of different pipeline drugs for further development. And finally, in the end, I suppose what these projects in a practical sense are aimed at is they're really aimed at avoiding expensive mistakes in developing drugs that actually have low marketability. So sometimes there may be a drug that in the pipeline, it somehow looks very attractive. Maybe the mechanism is very new, or the molecular target seems to be a very exciting scientific concept. But when we think about the marketability, the commercial opportunity for that drug, sometimes the picture can be quite different. So, of course, clinical development is very expensive. And so to avoid expensive mistakes in developing drugs that have low marketability, we do recommend that our clients conduct these pipeline drug opportunity assessments in order to save money and to make sure that their money is spent in the correct areas on developing the drugs that have the highest commercial opportunity. So that was the why of these pipeline drug opportunity assessments. And let's move on to the when. So this is one of the frequent questions that we have from our clients. So when should we conduct a pipeline drug opportunity assessment project? And what are the advantages or disadvantages of conducting these types of projects at different phases of development? So, well, what I would say to you is that really each phase of development of a product can be an appropriate time to conduct a pipeline drug opportunity assessment. But I would say that these projects, when conducted at different phases, they each have different goals. So you can see this picture. I share this picture not so much because of the Olympics, but just because you can see, you know, when you start the race, it looks like one guy is kind of further behind and one guy is kind of further ahead, but they all have a chance to win the race. So this is kind of similar to the thinking about when you should conduct this type of project. Wherever you are in the development process, you will be able to have different goals and different outputs from this type of project. So, for example, we do a great deal of projects in this area for pipeline products that are actually still in preclinical development. And in preclinical development, this can be an opportunity to confirm the marketability of a product before spending money on clinical trials. It can also be a chance to get feedback from key opinion leaders or from other stakeholders on mechanisms of action or molecular targets, particularly if these are new or represent some kind of new scientific or other breakthrough in the treatment of a particular disease. So although some people think that preclinical is quite an early time to conduct this type of project, we actually do a lot of projects, a large number of projects at the preclinical stage, and we think that these do provide significant value to our clients for the reasons that you see on the slide. At phase one, of course, this can help you to plan for clinical trials in patients. It can also help you to prioritize different development scenarios, for example, development in different indications or in different patient segments. At phase two, well, of course, at phase two, you'll have some data already. So this will mean that you have a more developed TPP, and this can help you to decide on some of the details of the clinical development plan and to assess how you can develop your drug to maximize the market potential once the drug is launched. So this may be in deciding different patient segments, different types of formulation or delivery method, different endpoints in clinical trials and so forth. And of course, this can also save money. This can help you to avoid expensive failures in phase three, of course, phase three being the most expensive area of development. Now, if your product is already in phase 3, well, is this too late? Well, not necessarily. Generally speaking, we would advise our clients to conduct opportunity assessments in, well, let's say an earlier phase than phase 3. But if your product is already in late phase development, it's already in phase 3. So that means you have all of the phase 2 data. You're already conducting phase 3 or perhaps planning for phase 3. This is still an opportunity to further assess or to confirm the marketability of your product. And we do find clients who, for example, may conduct an opportunity assessment when the product is in preclinical or phase 1 stage, and then also maybe a number of years later, come back and ask us to conduct another opportunity assessment once more information, once more data have been generated for the drug. And this is a perfectly rational form of opportunity assessment. This can help you, of course, to prepare for launch and to identify some of the key success factors that will make your drug a commercial success. So overall, it doesn't matter which lane you're running in this racing track. You can be very early in the game or quite late in the game. And any of these can be an appropriate time to conduct a pipeline drug opportunity assessment. If you ask for my personal advice, I would say, generally speaking, if possible, you should probably conduct this type of assessment before phase 3 at least. So this means that you could have some data, for example, from phase 1 and phase 2, so you can have a relatively clear, relatively fixed TPP, and this will allow you to conduct a robust project and also allow you to maybe avoid some of the expensive mistakes that could otherwise be made in phase 3 or, of course, in the commercial launch phase of the product. If you have a product in very early development, preclinical or phase 1, we do think that this is also an excellent time to get an early understanding of the marketplace, because, of course, things get very expensive very quickly once clinical development in humans and particularly in patients begins. So even at the preclinical stage, this can be an effective time to get feedback on the marketability of your pipeline drug. So, in answering the question when, well, so far we've looked at when in a kind of linear sense, so preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We've looked at some of the advantages and some of the reasons why you may conduct an opportunity assessment for your pipeline drug at each of those phases of development. Well, on this slide, I just want to share a slightly different way of thinking about this. You may, of course, want to think not in terms of linear drug development, but in terms of opportunity assessments that help you to gauge the impact of certain situations. So we all know, unfortunately, that drug development is a risky and unpredictable process, and sometimes things happen that were slightly outside of our expectations. This could be in a good way, or of course it could be in a rather negative way. You may have new clinical trial data. The data may be rather good or rather bad. They may affect the target product profile, the TPP of your product. And of course, this will affect the commercial opportunity for your product. There may be a decision taken in your company to out-license the product that you're working on. That's perfectly possible. So someone may say that the product will no longer be developed inside your company, but should be out-licensed, should be sold to another company. This can be an important time to conduct opportunity assessments, because at this time, it's very important, of course, to demonstrate the value of the product that you have been developing and to be able to communicate that value to potential licensing partners. And there may also be situations where it's really important to get an independent opinion on the commercial opportunity for the drug that you have in development. So by an independent opinion, what I mean is a third-party opinion from outside of the company that is developing the product. As you all know, sometimes working in a company, we all have a boss, and our boss also has a boss, and the company has a way of thinking, and the senior management has a way of thinking. And sometimes products are developed maybe less for reasons about how good those products really are, but maybe more for reasons that are related to the company or related to the company structure or some political or managerial decision within the company. And sometimes these, let's call them factors that are not related to the drug itself, so factors that are related to the organization, to the company, to the managerial structure, to historical decision making. Sometimes these situations can be difficult to manage purely based on internal opinions. It can be difficult to make an objective assessment of the commercial opportunity for a drug when that assessment is being made by people within the same company. There can be different forms of competition, different forms of cooperation or lack of cooperation between different departments or different areas of the company. And in this sort of case, it may be really important to get an independent opinion of the commercial opportunity for a drug. And of course, as an independent third party, the consulting team here at Informa Pharma can give you that third party independent opinion about the commercial opportunity that is presented by a drug that you may have in development. And there may be opportunities. Hopefully the situation will not be as chaotic as you see in this picture. Hopefully there'll be no one standing on the table or running around, but there may be some situations that are unexpected or unplanned where you need an opportunity assessment that may be perhaps in addition to what you may have been planning previously. So that's another way of thinking about when an opportunity assessment may be appropriate for your drug. So finally, how? So what are the key components of an opportunity assessment, and how do we select the correct components of an opportunity assessment to match the goals and the outputs that we want from this type of project? So this slide just summarizes in a very simple way some of the key components, some of the key elements of this type of project. So generally speaking, there'll be some area of secondary research conducted as part of this type of project. Also primary research. So primary research simply means interviews or surveys with physicians or other stakeholders in the market. And of course, there may be a forecast that is created as part of the opportunity assessment. And typically the forecast will use outputs from the secondary and primary research to help to build a robust and reliable sales forecast for the product that you have in development. So let's take a slightly more detailed look at some of these areas. So secondary research, as I mentioned, working at Informa, we have a big advantage in terms of the objective gold standard data on clinical trials, on pipeline drugs, on pharmaceutical companies, on the market landscape, in all of the database and analysis products that belong to Informa Pharma. So we tend to find that when we conduct these projects, we can be quicker and more efficient because we have a great deal of information that is available to us. And also, of course, the colleagues who create those databases and analysis tools are also available to us to help us to understand the markets that we are studying in a particular project. So we tend to find that secondary research in particular is much more efficient. And the cost performance may be higher than some consulting companies that do not have access to this type of information. Now, of course, within secondary research, we do also use external sources. So if there is a source outside of Informa, which is better, or which provides information that Informa does not have, then of course we will use that source. Excuse me. Of course, we will use that source to provide the best result for the client. So the secondary research will combine internal Informa Pharma materials with, of course, external secondary sources to find the best solution for the particular client in the particular situation. It's a similar picture with primary research. So there are many different types of primary research. And as we move to the right-hand side of this slide, I'd like you to think first about the difference between qualitative and quantitative primary research. So by qualitative research, we mean primarily primary research, so interviews or surveys with stakeholders such as doctors, prescribers, KOLs, payers, patients, and so forth, that is done in a qualitative manner. So by qualitative, we mean focusing on issues, ideas, reactions, perceptions, opinions about a drug or about the marketplace. These are topics that we would call qualitative topics. So this may help us, for example, to understand how KOLs segment their patients? Do they segment them by severity? Do they segment them by disease stage? Do they segment them by race or by gender or by various other categories, by age, by subtype of disease? And it can also help us to understand things like the patient journey and the experience of the patient as they move from presentation to diagnosis to treatment with prescription or non-prescription treatments, and of course through the different lines of prescription drug therapy. So these are qualitative type topics that can help us to understand the overall environment in which your product will be competing once it reaches the marketplace. When we think about quantitative primary research, what we're talking about there is primarily research that will result in the production of numbers. So questions that when they are asked will produce an answer which is a number. So a typical question might be, for example, what percentage of your patients, if we're interviewing a doctor, what percentage of your patients currently fail first-line therapy? So in other words, what percentage of your patients need to go on to second-line therapy because they did not respond to, or maybe they had side effects with first-line therapy. We could ask a question such as, on a score from 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with current drug therapy for this disease? And so then the doctor or maybe the patient or the key opinion leader will give an answer from 1 to 10 to indicate their level of satisfaction with a particular drug or with overall therapy available in a particular indication. So this is what we call quantitative research. Now, in terms of the types of respondents, the types of people who we can survey or interview, we've given some of the most common examples on the right-hand side of the slide. So key opinion leaders, those famous doctors usually working in large university hospitals who are very experienced, who conduct clinical trials, who are very familiar with the competition and with the treatment of particular diseases. These can be excellent sources, particularly when perhaps we only want to speak to a few people, maybe 5 or 10 interviewees. KOLs, key opinion leaders, can be an excellent choice because they help us to understand in a broad sense the market and the indication that we are interested in. Excuse me. So a lot of the work that we do with key opinion leaders is typically qualitative. So we'll ask them questions about the overall market makeup that generally are questions that are answered in words and sentences rather than questions that are answered in numbers or percentages. When we think about prescribers, so by prescribers we normally mean those regular physicians who are perhaps not key opinion leaders, but perhaps who write quite a significant number of prescriptions to treat a particular disease in a particular country. So prescribers, of course, are a very important source, and they can often give us quantitative data. We can often survey, for example, through an online survey. We can create a quantitative online survey where we may survey 50 or 60 or 80 or 100 or whatever it may be, prescribers in a particular country. And this can help us to get very powerful numerical data, percentages, numbers that can help us to understand the current market situation and the likely acceptance of a new product on the market in a more statistical or number-driven manner. Payers, of course, another very important type of interviewee. Typically payers we would interview through telephone interviews. Again, these would generally be qualitative interviews. And payers will help us to understand the reimbursement and payment landscape and pricing landscape for a new product. So as you know, it's no longer good enough to create a drug that works. The drug also needs to be attractive from a pharmacoeconomic standpoint. It needs to be attractive from a pricing standpoint, and perhaps it needs to have the potential for cost savings when compared with other existing therapies, either simply by being cheaper, or of course it could be more expensive, but by providing better care for a patient that avoids later more expensive costs, such as hospitalization, transplant, surgery, and so forth. These are very complex but very important issues. And by speaking with payers who work either, depending on the country, in public or private insurance, and that may be a national insurance system, such as in the UK or in mainland Europe, or it may be private insurers in the US. These payers can help us to understand how the pricing and reimbursement, the pricing and market access issues that will affect your drug, how these will shape in a positive or a negative way the opportunity for commercial success of your product. And finally, patients. Of course, patients are the end users of the drugs that you work hard to produce. And in certain circumstances, it can be very important to interview patients about their experiences of managing and treating and living with their disease, and also to get their reaction to particular products. This can be particularly important, for example, if you're thinking about a new product that may have a novel delivery system or new type of or way of administering the drug. There may be a particular device or other thing, other delivery mechanism that the patient has to use. And this sort of case, checking the acceptability of this type of delivery system or this other type of innovation to patients can be extremely important in assessing the potential likelihood of commercial success for your product. Now, of course, there are other types of primary research that we conduct. We can talk to pharmacists, we can talk to people who work in procurement, in hospitals or in different parts of the pharmaceutical supply chain. And we can also sometimes talk to people who work in the pharmaceutical industry itself. Sometimes it may be important to get input from others who work in the pharma industry. But generally speaking, key opinion leaders, prescribers, payers, and patients, these are four of the most common primary research targets for a pipeline drug opportunity assessment. So there are lots of options, but we like to think of these projects as kind of like a recipe. So I guess on this slide, you see some sort of soup or something that hopefully will be good to eat, that will produce a good result. But what's really important here is to get the right mix of the different ingredients that can go into this type of opportunity assessment. So 3 steps: pick your ingredients, match your methods to your goals, and then stir. So stirring, I suppose, is what's going to make all of the ingredients work well together and produce something that is delicious, something that is attractive in terms of the final output. So what do we mean by pick your ingredients? So here, what we mean is that it's important to choose the appropriate combination of primary and secondary research, and also qualitative and quantitative elements. So we can help our clients to think carefully about which questions can be answered most effectively through primary research and which questions can be answered most effectively through secondary research. Let me give you a simple example. Personally, I think if you need to know about the epidemiology of a disease, how many patients have a particular disease in a particular country, personally, I would recommend that that type of question be handled through secondary research. If you ask that sort of question through primary research, for example, if you interview doctors or key opinion leaders and ask them how many patients are there in your country with this particular disease, well, they may know, but also they may not know, or they may know, but they may forget, or they may know, but they may not give you the right answer. And generally speaking, epidemiological data, this can be found in the secondary literature. So for example, if it's important to understand the epidemiology of a disease, then we would recommend secondary research instead of primary research for that part of the project. Of course, there can be exceptions. If we're looking at a very rare disease, often for an orphan indication, actually the secondary research, the published papers about how many patients have a very rare or orphan condition, this can be quite unclear. And in those cases, it can be entirely justified to ask key opinion leaders who may see significant numbers of these patients. It may be perfectly justified to ask them about the patient throughput, about the number of patients that they see every year, whether this is expanding or getting smaller. And this can help us to gain important insights into the epidemiological change within a particular disease. So it's important to think about the characteristics of the market and the disease that you're studying, and then to choose the correct choice of primary or secondary research, or generally a combination, to answer the type of question that you need to answer. In the same way, we encourage our clients to think carefully, and we will help you to think carefully about which questions can best be answered through a qualitative approach, and which questions can correctly be answered through a quantitative approach. So there are different approaches and different goals and different things that either can or cannot be answered through qualitative or quantitative approaches. It's important to understand the distinction between the two. This is what we call matching the methods to the goals. So when we think about the inputs to the project, it's important from the start to think about the outputs. So what is the output that you want? Is the output that you want a graph, for example, that compares the attractiveness of 3 different products on a scale of 1 to 10? If that is the output that you desire, then of course a quantitative approach, a quantitative question is what you need to produce that kind of output. If, on the other hand, you need to understand in a broader, more general manner the patient journey so that you can understand where and how patients are currently treated, where they are diagnosed, are they referred, who are they treated by, is it a specialist, are they referred back to a primary care physician when their disease is stable, and so forth. These are qualitative outputs, and therefore the input or the methodology should also be qualitative. And finally, STIR. By STIR, we mean matching up the qualitative and the quantitative research, the primary and the secondary research, to produce the best result for our client. So just 2 more quick topics. Let me take a look at the time. I should probably try to speed up slightly, but just a few issues to avoid some of the problems that we see in this type of project, some of the questions that we receive from our clients. So I've already mentioned it's a mistake to confuse quantitative and qualitative research. So if you need a quantitative output, then you need a quantitative input. You need a quantitative methodology. If you need a qualitative output, then you need a qualitative input, a qualitative methodology. And it's important to think about whether a quantitative methodology is really appropriate based on the N number of your sample size. So for example, if you are interviewing 5 key opinion leaders, you may not want to ask a large number of quantitative questions, because of course, if you ask quantitative questions, you'll get answers which are numbers. And then if you only asked 5 people, well, if you take the average of the answers from 5 people, it may be that the statistical meaning of this average is not very strong. So in that sort of situation, for example, we might suggest that it's more suitable, more appropriate to ask more qualitative questions rather than quantitative questions. Of course, if you're conducting a large online survey, maybe you have 30 or 50 or 80 or 100 prescribing physicians who are answering questions, then of course it's entirely appropriate to use a quantitative methodology. And in that sort of situation, it may actually be a mistake to use a qualitative methodology. If you ask 100 doctors to write 3 sentences to answer a question, well, that's kind of a mess. That's kind of a lot of work when you have to read 3 sentences times 100 from 100 different doctors, and then you have to sort out what do these 3 sentences mean when they answer the question. That's actually very difficult to understand and very difficult to interpret. So it's important to think about the input and the output, and to choose the methodology which is important, which is appropriate for the output and the goal that you have. So it's important to avoid confusing quantitative and qualitative methodologies. Secondly, trying to do too much. It's always a temptation when running this type of project to ask every question, to cover every angle, every scenario, every possibility. And sometimes when we try to do too much, what that actually means is that we actually lower the quality or the depth of the project work that we can do. So we would work together with our clients. Instead of trying to do too much, trying to put too much into one project, we would recommend trying to prioritize those things which are most important, which will really affect the decision-making as you develop your drug. And this can help you to avoid trying to do too much. We would also advise you to avoid overly complex questions. When we ask questions to respondents, to doctors, to patients, to payers, to KOLs, if the questions are very complex or very difficult to understand, the results can be also difficult to understand or may lack meaning. So we generally advise on maximizing the simplicity and the easiness to understand of the questions that we ask. And of course, we have a lot of experience in this, and we can help you to write questions that will be straightforward and easy to understand for the people who need to respond to those questions. Two final points. Overly cautious TPPs. So this is my personal advice. Some people may disagree with me, but sometimes I find that our clients are overly cautious in the creation of the TPP. What do I mean by overly cautious? Well, Oftentimes a client will say, well, my drug is still in preclinical development, or it's only in phase 1 development, so I don't really have any data. I'm a scientist. I don't really have proof that this drug will work in this way or will have this level of efficacy. So the TPP, the target product profile that I create to describe the drug, will be very cautious. Well, it's good to be cautious in some circumstances, but of course, if your TPP is too cautious, then of course the reaction that you get to the TPP is likely to be quite negative. And I think the important thing about a TPP, I always say, is the first letter of TPP. So TPP stands for target product profile, and T stands for target. So target means something that we are aiming for. It does not necessarily mean that we already have all of the data, all of the evidence to support every statement that we write in the TPP. What it means is that if the development of this drug goes well in the way that we expect, then this is the target that we are aiming for. And we should be ambitious in the targets that we aim for. Otherwise, we are likely not to be successful in the commercial marketplace. Because of course, there will be many other companies that are developing drugs in a very ambitious or aggressive manner. So we would encourage our clients not to be too cautious when you prepare your TPPs. And of course, you can prepare, and we can help you to prepare more than one TPP. So we may present, for example, a base case and a best case, or a base case and a worst case and a best case. And we can test these different TPPs to find the different responses to them. And then you can have an idea, however the development of your drug works out, you can have an idea for its potential commercial opportunity. And finally, forgetting about holidays. Forgetting about holidays is a mistake in life in general. I encourage you to take the holidays that you can if your boss will allow you. But by forgetting about holidays, what we mean is forgetting about holidays, particularly perhaps in Europe or the US, for doctors or for other professional people who may have maybe longer holidays than sometimes people in working in Japan are able to have. So if you need a result or an answer very quickly, you should plan ahead, and you should try to avoid the holiday seasons in Europe or in the US in particular, or in China. And of course, those holidays may be different to the holidays that are celebrated in Japan. So this is really just about the timing and scheduling of these types of projects. And again, of course, we can help to advise you in that area. So I have 3 more slides, and I'll try to cover them in about 1 minute each, and this will leave us about 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. So just thinking about some of the differences in conducting projects in different countries. So our team is very international. We have people, of course, in the US as well as in Europe, and also in China. And so we work internationally with clients and with stakeholders, physicians, patients, payers, and so forth in each of these countries. So I just want to share with you some of the differences and some of the advice that we see having conducted a large number of these projects over a very large number of years. So of course, this is the USA slide. Some of you may be familiar with Bruce Springsteen. I've chosen a musical theme for these slides. So Bruce Springsteen is a very dynamic, very loud rock and roll sort of musician. And I've used him here to represent the US. So in the US, we tend to find that on the positive side, primary research recruitment is relatively straightforward. Doctors and other stakeholders are very accustomed. They understand participating in this type of primary research. Online surveys are very simple to conduct in the US, and the variety of respondents that can be reached in the US is generally very high. In terms of some of the drawbacks or some of the things to be aware of, we tend to find that the American interviewees, the American primary research respondents, tend to be rather overly positive when we ask them questions. So even if the product that we are showing the American doctor or the American patient is not very good, often the doctor will say, wow, that's amazing. That's really great. I really want to use that. But sometimes we find that there's a bit of a gap between what they say and then actually what they do in the end. So maybe this is like Bruce Springsteen. It's very dynamic and loud and positive, but we need to be careful when we think about how to analyze that type of feedback. Thanksgiving and Christmas, please remember that these are important for people in America. So try to avoid these busy periods when you plan your research. And key opinion leaders in America in particular tend to be rather expensive. So this is just something to keep in mind. In Europe, so this is not Bruce Springsteen. This is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who I'm using to represent Europe here. So some of the factors are similar. We find that primary research recruitment in Europe is also quite straightforward. Online surveys are also very common now in Europe. Maybe 10 years ago, not so much, but now they're very common. And English is very widely used. So even if we are interviewing key opinion leaders in, let's say, France or Germany, we find that the English is usually excellent. And this can save time and costs on things like translation. Of course, we do have many people in our team who speak different languages, and including different European languages. And so where necessary, we can, of course, conduct primary research in different languages. But of course, it's cheaper and quicker where we can just use English. And in most European countries, that is possible. A few just things to be aware of. We do find that because there are heavy cost pressures in most European markets, because the government is generally the payer, the ultimate payer for most drugs in Europe is the government. And of course, governments generally do not have enough money. So this can lead to some less positive or cautious answers when we conduct primary research. So a lot of Europeans will say, well, your TPP looks okay, but if the drug is too expensive, I can't really use it, or will only be used in a small number of patients or something like this. So we just need to be, unlike the Americans who tend to be maybe overly positive, sometimes the Europeans can be a little bit miserable, a little bit overly negative. And it's important to balance and to understand and to analyze the results with this in mind. Some Europeans in mainland Europe, let's say France or Spain or Italy, take very long summer holidays. So something just very practical to think about. And it can be more challenging to identify payers in European markets, because generally they work for the government. But if you need to interview payers in Europe, we do have our contacts and we do have our sources, and we can do those projects, but they may just take a little bit longer because they can be harder to recruit. And finally, China. This is the erhu. It's a traditional Chinese instrument, sort of like, well, anyway, you can see what it is. Some of you will be familiar with it. There are some challenges when we conduct these projects in China. We're quite experienced in doing them. We've done a large number of these projects for Chinese companies and also for Japanese and American and European companies who are interested in the Chinese market. But primary research recruitment tends to be more difficult. China has different national holidays, Chinese New Year, other holidays. And of course, it's very important to use Chinese when we conduct these projects. Now, fortunately, we have a very experienced team. We have local team members who are based in China, and we have 6 members of the team who can speak Chinese. So this gives us speak and read and write Chinese. So this gives us a good advantage in terms of local market knowledge and in terms of being able to conduct these types of projects in China. So China is probably the most challenging market, but we've been very successful in this market in recent years in conducting projects for both local Chinese and also multinational Japanese or European or American companies who are interested in the Chinese market. So if this is a market that is interesting to you, then I recommend that you get in touch with us and we can discuss. So I have run over by probably 5 or 10 minutes. So I will stop now. We have probably 7 or 8 minutes for questions. And I hope this was interesting or useful to you. And I'll pause now to see if there are any questions from those who are online today.
Yes, Tim, we have 2 questions from the audience.
Yes. So I'm just reading the questions. So the first question, Tamaki-san. So thank you, first of all, for your question. Your question is, in general, how far in the future can you predict the product opportunity? Excellent question. So basically, even after one candidate medicine starts clinical development, it takes years. Certainly. What is important for us is how the candidate will be attractive in the future clinical setting, including not only existing drugs, but also other currently developing candidates. That's an excellent question and an excellent point, Tamaki-san. So thank you for your question. So generally speaking, we can in fact predict to some degree of accuracy the future market, but of course the degree of accuracy will be smaller and smaller the earlier the stage of development. So of course, if the product is still in preclinical development, it may not be launched maybe for 10 or even more years after preclinical development, clinical development are completed. And of course, it can be more difficult to see what is the future in 10 or 12 or 15 years time in the market. But this is where working at Informa Pharma has its advantages. So we have very powerful databases of clinical trials and of pipeline drugs that are in development, including in preclinical development. So even if we are looking at a drug that is currently in preclinical development, we can survey and we can consider and analyze the other drugs that are in preclinical development currently. And so we can try to predict the future situation of the marketplace in exactly the way that you say, Tamaki-san. So to consider not just the existing drugs, but also, of course, the other pipeline drugs that are being developed. And as you say, this is definitely very important. Of course, if the drug is in later stage development, then this becomes easier because we have greater visibility. We have maybe some clinical trial data or other information about the pipeline drugs that are being developed. And this can help us to have a more certain view, a more fixed view of the future marketplace. But as I say, many of our clients actually use this type of product assessment, opportunity assessment, even at the preclinical stage, to help them to understand the commercial opportunity for a preclinical product. So we certainly have experience in, let's say, forecasting or predicting the future product opportunity, maybe even 10 or 12 or even 15 years into the future. So thank you for that question. The second question, Hash-san. So the question is, in the preclinical phase, it may be very difficult to confirm the marketability for a drug candidate because it takes more than 7 to 10 years from new drug to launch. How accurate are the values? How accurate should the values be that we provide in the market assessment in this stage? And do we use any way of discounted cash flow in this assessment? So excellent question. I think there are two parts there. So the first part is, how accurate is the information that we need to provide for this type of market assessment at the preclinical stage? So I would refer back, Hash-san, to a point that I made, the importance of the T in target product profile, as in TPP. So when we think about a TPP, to me, the key is target. So what we're saying here is not necessarily we have all of the evidence, we have accurate values, for example, around safety or around efficacy for a particular drug. But what we're saying is this is the target. These are the target values that we are aiming for in the development of this drug. And as I mentioned, we can do this in the way of modeling different scenarios, for example, a best case, a base case, and a worst case scenario, so that however the actual real values of the drug develop over time, they can perhaps be covered by one of those different scenarios. So I would actually say it is not so important to provide accurate values for efficacy or safety, for example, in the case of a drug that is still in preclinical development, because what we really need to see is what is the market opportunity if the product can achieve X or Y or Z, if the product can achieve different levels of clinical success. So that's the way that I would think about that question. There are two more questions, 3 questions perhaps, and I have 2 minutes, so I'll try and be quick. What are the caveats to conduct assessments in Japan? Very good question. So I think 2 caveats. We tend to need a little bit more time in Japan. It can be a little bit more complicated to conduct primary research in particular. Often we have to rely on some personal networks or connections or introductions to the famous doctors or key opinion leaders, and this can take more time than in the US. I think it's not so easy just to send a random email to a university professor in Japan and say, can I speak to you next Tuesday for 1 hour? They probably will not really pay attention to you unless they already have some introduction or they already know you. Of course, it's very possible in the US. You can simply send that type of email, people will reply, you'll do an interview with them, you'll pay them. It's very easy. In Japan, that's a little bit more difficult. So I would say it can be a little bit more expensive and it can take a little bit more time in the Japanese market. 2 more questions. What is a pitfall when you assess the product feasibility and marketability for an orphan drug? That's a very good question. Those can be very challenging projects because there are not many analogs. There are not many examples from the existing marketplace that can help us to understand the market. So I think that's the main pitfall. So what we do in that type of situation, again, scenario forecasts can help us to, or scenario planning for different levels of success in the TPP can be used to help to cover all of the potential opportunities, whether good or bad, for a particular drug. And this can help us, particularly in the case of an orphan drug. My apologies, Hayashi-san, I realize I did not answer your second question, which is, can we use discounted cash flow, DCF, as part of NPV modeling in this type of project? No, of course we can, yes. And if you need a sales forecast, which is also an NPV forecast with DCF, then of course we do that all the time. And that, of course, is an appropriate way to handle this type of project. The final question, how about cell therapy and regenerative medicine field? Does Informa have capabilities or expertise in this market? We certainly do. Of course, very hot topic, and many of our clients are very interested in this area. So we have conducted a number of projects in this area. And if you have something in mind, we would, of course, be happy to speak with you. So I think those were all the questions.
Tim, sorry, but
yes.
We have another question from chat. Can you take a look at chat?
Chat means in the Q&A?
No, chat features.
Chat feature. Okay, I got it. Okay, two questions here. Could you let us know the variables which should be applied specifically for sales forecast in China, e.g. urban versus rural proportion? Very good question. Okay, so let's take that one first. Asakura-san, thank you for your question. I think there are a number of important variables. You mentioned one is the urban versus rural proportion. Another important one is to think about the tier of hospital that you are thinking about. So whether these are the so-called 3A hospitals, so the largest, most sophisticated hospitals, or whether you are also considering selling the product in smaller hospitals. I think it's important to think about the marketing capability of any partner that you may have in China. Many Chinese companies are strong in a particular part of the country, but not so strong in another part of the country. So these are all important factors to consider when we think about sales forecasts in the Chinese market. Cost, of course, is also very important. Now, China used to be a low-cost market. Increasingly, high costs can also be achieved, but the trade-off between price and volume is an important consideration, I think, in creating sales forecasts. So, of course, the higher the price, the lower the volume, the lower the price, the higher the volume, and it's finding the correct combination of price and volume that will maximize your sales. And to me, that's a very important point. Another question from Asakura-san, so thank you very much. Oh, that's actually the same question. It's just been typed twice. So I think those were the questions in the chat box. So thank you very much. And of course, if you have other questions that you would like to share by email, either directly to me or to the sales team, then please feel free to do so. And if you have particular questions or issues or projects that you would like to consider, then please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. So I hope this was useful. This is a very simple introduction to some of the work that we do. Of course, we do many other types of projects, and should you have anything that you would like to discuss, we're always happy to talk to you. There's no charge for a discussion about something that you're thinking about or for a proposal. So please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. So I thank you very much for your time and your attention today, and I look forward to maybe speaking or collaborating with some of you in the future. Thank you.